I feel like this is becoming too much of a comparison between this book and A Court of Mist and Fury. Hey everyone! I am so excited for today's video. I finally finished A Court of Silver Flames last night, and yeah, I got some thoughts. I ended up rating this a 5-star read for me. That's not too surprising with Sarah J. Maas. I really do love her. She's my favorite author. That being said, I will be talking about the goods and bads in this video. As with all of my full book reviews, this is going to be split into 4 distinct parts, starting with our teaser for if you want to go in blind, followed by our spoiler-free review, where I will do my best to talk about my thoughts without giving any spoilers whatsoever, and then our spoiler-filled review, which will have a lot of spoilers and a lot of my thoughts, and then followed by our discussion in number 4, where if I choose to go into detail on any of these topics, I'll just throw them in there. I am going to issue a trigger warning for rape, alcoholism, PTSD, and thoughts of suicide. If any of those topics are particularly triggering to you, I would recommend skipping this installment of this book. They do go into it a lot more detail than they did in A Court of Mist and Fury, and so this is going to be fairly heavy in certain areas. I think she did very well at talking about these topics, but others very much disagree, and I'll get into that during our discussion portion. Without further ado, let's get into our teaser. Do you really like the vibes of Birds of Prey and are a sucker for a montage sequence in an action movie? And did you think that A Court of Mist and Fury, it could have been going a little bit deeper into the mental health problems that Feyre was dealing with? Then this might be a really good read for you to pick up. We got badass women, we got trauma, and we've got a lot of character work. And that's it for the teaser. If any of those things tickled your interest, then pick the book up. But do keep in mind the trigger warning I gave at the beginning of this video. This book picks up where A Court of Frost and Starlight left off. A traumatized Nesta is engaging in self-destructive behavior to cope with the PTSD she has after the war on Hybern. Reviews are split over whether Sarah J. Maas does a good job exploring PTSD, trauma, depression, and these various mental health issues. I personally am in the camp that I think she handled them very well. Again, I'll get to that in the discussion portion, but that is something to know going into this book, is you might like how she deals with it, you might hate how she deals with it. As of Friday this morning, right after the release, I have seen pretty much exclusively 1-star reviews and 5-star reviews on Goodreads, and a lot of the disparity has to do with how people perceive how she dealt with Nesta's PTSD. For this book, I actually thought the beginning and ramp up into the plot of this new trilogy was well developed in a way that ACOTAR wasn't. I thought that the first book of ACOTAR was honestly very weak. I only rated it 3 out of 5 stars, and I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that ramping up into the plot was kind of lackluster. I don't think they did a really good job of exploring the world, about stakes or anything, which kind of makes it seem that A Court of Mist and Fury almost feels like a completely different book, and that ACOTAR was just simply a prologue. And that is not how I felt with A Court of Silver Flames. I felt that they actually introduced the plot and the main villains very well in the first book, in a way that she didn't in the others. Another good thing to note is that I did not like Nesta all that much in the original trilogy. I absolutely didn't hate her, but I was not her biggest fan. And this book made me love her. Sarah J. Maas put the time and effort into character work to give her a really satisfying, in my opinion, redemption arc. You get to learn more about her thoughts and feelings behind some of her more vicious actions, and while it doesn't forgive those actions, it does kind of provide a place of understanding when looking at this character from other people's perspectives. And it made me appreciate her in ACOTAR a lot more. Also, her feelings about herself and others are really relatable, especially when you've gone through such a trauma. So I would super be looking forward to that. Again, I don't think I've given any spoilers. I think that's just a common human emotion that is really prevalent in this book. And let's talk about the romance in non-spoiler terms. I thought it was not as good as A Court of Mist and Fury, but honestly, who can live up to A Court of Mist and Fury? I thought it was fine. I was surprised that it wasn't the reason I was reading the book, because I was really going in expecting for my boy Cassian to finally get this grand love arc, and I ended up sticking around and really reading for different things entirely. So the romance definitely is not the shining star in this book, unlike you know, ACOTAR in A Court of Mist and Fury. I kind of wish she would have developed it a little more, but at the same time, they've known each other for like, what, 2 years at this point? So there's not that much buildup. There are also a host of new side characters that are introduced in this book, and I do end up really liking them. I don't feel the same connection that I immediately felt towards the inner circle when I was reading A Court of Mist and Fury. I feel like this is becoming too much of a comparison between this book and A Court of Mist and Fury. Either way, these characters were very heartwarming and endearing, and I am excited to read more about them in the following books that will come out. Alright, that is it for my spoiler-free review. Now we're gonna go right into a spoiler-filled review. If you have not read this book yet and you plan to, this would be the ideal stopping point to go pick it up and finish. Guys, I predicted it. I predicted it like a few chapters in, but it didn't matter because I still loved it. And of course I am talking about the blood right. A few things I do wish. I wish it was more brutal, honestly. I know she like stabs a guy in the neck right out the gate, but I wish it was more brutal. I wanted to see more of it. I almost wish that that would have been a more significant part of the book because I thought it was super fun and interesting. Like, come on. Show me some violence. They even pan away during the biggest death, or I guess not death because the guys end up surviving. But I'm talking when Gwyn ends up leading the beast over to destroy Emery's cousin. Like, that was cool. I want to see that. Someone stick around. Someone tell me from their perspective what's going on there. Overall, I thought the brutality was lacking, but the themes and the parallels between this three group of friends and Cassian, Azriel, and Rhys, I thought that was very sweet. As far as romance, I agree with a lot of the criticism that they kind of just had sex and then suddenly it became feelings, and it wasn't really well developed on the feelings front as much as it was on the sex front. And also I've heard a lot of people say that it was really cringy, the sex scenes that did happen, and I totally understand that. I was personally fine with them, but I did understand where people were coming from with that. I do think that romance was lacking. Hopefully it gets better in subsequent books. I mean, they're mated now, so fun. Speaking of Farah though, oh my gosh, pregnant Farah and Rhys and them being happy. I mean, I also called that at the beginning because she was just wearing big sweaters and he had a shield around her all the time. But honestly, if you've read A Court of Frost and Starlight, I doubt anyone was surprised by that. I don't even think she meant to make it as a twist, honestly. I think Sarah J. Maas knew that the readers were in the know on that one. And yeah, it wasn't surprising. I still loved it though. It was cute. It was fluffy. I was not a huge fan of the, ooh, the baby's gonna kill her subplot. I just thought that it wasn't needed. And I ended up not liking the fact that Nesta gave up all her powers to save the baby. I think that kind of undermined the fact that it was her story, and we kind of want to see Farah and Rhys be happy and everything, but we don't need to like have Nesta lose her powers and her arc of the whole story for that. I don't know, and that might be an unpopular opinion, but that's kind of my thoughts on the matter. I would have just preferred if they just had a kid and it was fine. So let's talk a little bit about Emery and Gwyn. I really liked that they brought up multiple people's traumas and kind of the friendships and bonds that form when people have gone through somewhat similar experiences, or that they are all hurting together, and kind of the sisterhood that can emerge from that. I thought that was a very good plot point, and it actually ended up being a lot of the reason I kept reading and liked and enjoyed it so much, was that their friendship was really the heart of the book, and learning to deal with trauma together. I think that was so sweet, and the fact that they reclaimed their helplessness through fighting and kind of aspiring to be these female warriors of the past, the Valkyries. I thought that was honestly a very good take on it, and I ended up enjoying that plotline a lot. And I think that is another thing that people might have thought was too cheesy. Again, difference of opinions. That being said, I thought Nesta's trauma compared to Emery and Gwyn's was a little like, okay, I mean, like, yeah, you went to war, and absolutely that was hard and everything. Emery and Gwyn though, like, that was rough. Overall, I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. A lot of that has to do with the fact that I love character work, and this was a ridiculous amount of character work, delving deep into mental health issues. All of the cheesy aspects are tropes that I love. A group of women getting together and becoming badasses. And honestly, I thought that the romance, while lacking, was fine for me. It didn't detract from the novel, which I know it did for others. So overall, I really enjoyed this book, and I thought that the ways that it made me care about Nesta, where I hadn't previously, definitely earned it a 5-star read from me. But that being said, I am done with my spoiler-filled review. Let's go ahead and go right into the discussion. We are going to be talking about, of course, the issue that is really separating 1-star and 5-star reviews right now, which is how Sarah J. Maas dealt with trauma, PTSD, depression throughout this book. So my opinion, right off the bat, so you guys know where I'm coming from, it will be biased, is that I really liked how she dealt with it. A lot of this has to do with my own personal experiences, as well as the experiences of my family. At the beginning of the book, Nesta is engaging in serious self-destructive behavior. I'm not talking about just silly little nights out where she gets drunk and has sex with strangers. That's, fine if you want to use that as a coping mechanism. People do that as not coping mechanisms, and I don't judge them at all. The reason why it's so self-destructive is because she's going against key parts of herself, and the alcoholism is actually just destroying her body. They even say at the beginning of the book how emaciated she looks. Now, it's been about a year from A Court of Frost and Starlight. They are approaching winter solstice once again, and so this self-destructive behavior has been going on for a very long time. And also the others in Court of Frost and Starlight, as we saw, were reaching out to Nesta this entire time. Feyre had been making an effort, Elaine had been making an effort, Amren had been making an effort. So I get why this final step needed to be taken. I've also seen a lot of people say that the 500 whatever that she spent that one night being the catalyst for all of the events of the book to happen was unwarranted, especially given how rich Rhysand and Feyre are. I have kind of a response to that, which is that this was the straw that broke the camel's back, not necessarily a singular event that caused everything to happen. It was just the final thing that finally made everyone say, we can't just let this keep going on. It had nothing to do with the fact that she was really spending their money, because she had been spending their money for over a year at that point. They had been paying her rent and doing all of these things, and it obviously never put a dent in their coffers or anything like that. So the fact that she spent that money isn't them being like, oh, you're wasting all of our money, because they're rich as hell. But it's the fact that she was so blindly doing it, and she was doing it to get a reaction out of them, and they realized they just can't condone this behavior anymore. I think it's also safe to say that when it was their money, it was something that they were supporting in a way, and no one should support self-destructive behavior. Also, as someone who has dealt with alcoholism in their family, I can tell you that the relationship she was ruining, as well as betraying herself, is not a good path to be on, and that is usually the point in which an intervention happens, and this is kind of just like a more extreme version of intervention. I think a lot of people who are critical of how the whole inner circle responded to this are kind of forgetting that this self-destructive behavior could not continue, or else Nesta would have ended up dying. I know she's Fae, but let's look at this in real world terms, because this is an analogy for the real world, and just go with me here. If Nesta had ended up dying due to her self-destructive behavior, she falls in the Sidra and drowns, for example, then that's going to be on Feyre's conscience forever, and the entire inner circle as well, because they are supporting financially this behavior. And I totally understand why they finally needed to cut her off and put a more serious regimen in place. So that's kind of my thoughts on that part of it. The other thing I want to say is that it is very taxing for a family to have someone who is going through these things. That's not forgiving their actions or what they say at all, especially when Cassian told Nesta that everyone hates her. That's unexcusable, and I think even he knew that because he apologized so quickly afterwards and realized how bad of a decision he had made. I'm just saying that it's understandable or explainable why they reacted the way that they were. It is always extremely hard on families to deal with this kind of behavior, especially when the person who is being affected has the gut reaction to lash out when they feel threatened, which Nesta does, as we've seen through all of the previous books. So I get where they're coming from when they have these little outbursts, because they're people too. As far as what they chose to kind of help her out, the combination of physical work and mental work and quiet is actually very common in a lot of mental health facilities, and so I totally understand why they went that route. You know, use that physical exertion to build yourself up physically and also to get out a lot of the anger and feelings that are really large inside of you, and then follow it up by some quiet moments where you can be self-reflective. It is a very common thing, and it has shown that it helps people. So I get why that was the regimen that they chose. Also, it's not like they were leaving her in squalor. She was living in basically a huge mansion on a mountain that overlooked an entire city. Now, should they have taken her to the Illyrian camp? No, they shouldn't have. They should have taught her at the house the entire time. I am 100% on that. But they needed some kind of convenient way for her to meet Emery, and so I kind of forgive it just for, like, plot's sake. But yeah, no, they should have taught her at House of Wind from the very beginning. And as far as taking her on the very, very long backpacking trip, which I know they can't call it that because it's old Fae times, but that also is a form of healing. You have heard about people taking the long trails up the coast of California as a way of becoming very self-reflective. I think that Sarah J. Maas was going for a similar experience to that, to break down the body, to finally be surrounded by nature and quiet, and have that be a moment of change and self-reflection within yourself, to finally understand why you do the things you do, and to kind of hit that breaking point in a safe environment, which she did. And so I understand that. I also very much relate to her kind of lashing out at others whenever she was going through such trauma and she felt undeserving, so she wanted to just push everyone away as much as she could. I've been in that position. I know friends of mine that have been in that position, and I know family members of mine that have been in that position. It's not good, and yet it's kind of a crucial part of dealing with trauma and depression. And so I completely understand why Sarah J. Maas decided to write her that way. So anyway, those are my thoughts and feelings on this issue over whether Sarah J. Maas dealt with mental health very well in this book. Obviously, my experiences are going to paint a very clear bias in this issue, but if you guys have different experiences or you have really strong feelings against how she dealt with this, that's still completely valid. Again, at the end of the day, this is fiction, and though it is very much related to things that happen in real life, and it can still affect people that are dealing with this in real life, I think it's important to take a step back and say that everyone is going to react to this differently depending on how they have dealt with this in real life. If you guys have any opinions on this issue, please leave a comment below. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts. And that is it for my A Court of Silver Flames review. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.